Thank you for joining The Ones Changing the World, India's first Future Tech Meets Sustainability podcast. And today, I'm delighted and honored to have with me Mr. Tirumala Venkatesh Kagundi, who's the Joint Director General of Foreign Trade at Directorate General of Foreign Trade at Ministry of Commerce, New Delhi. He looks after international trade matters and foreign trade policy of India. He is also a computational analysis and public policy graduate from the University of Chicago, Harris School of Public Policy and the Department of Computer Science. And his focus is on application of artificial intelligence, machine learning in governance and public policy. He also writes a blog titled Indian Vesselis. So Tirumala, really appreciate you taking time and being part of a humble podcast. So why don't we start with a small, brief introduction, and as the Joint Director General of Foreign Trade, what's your role? What's the requirement? What do you do over there?
First of all, that name itself, it sounds gaudy, Joint Director General of Foreign Trade. In simple terms, I am one of those people who work for the policy making of the foreign trade policy of India. I specialize in the international trade. I belong to a service called the Indian Trade Service, which looks after the international trade matter, some of the industrial development issues, and so on. So we come under the Ministry of Commerce and we look after these things. So, a brief introduction about me. I have been more like a technocrat. I'm an engineer by training. I was working in the private sector. Last, I worked with Airbus before joining the Government of India. And I've been posted in various places in the field, in Chennai, in Bangalore, in Ahmedabad, and so on. And lately, I was working in the policy-making areas in New Delhi at Udyog Bhavan. Before I took the opportunity to upgrade my knowledge and skills mid-career. So that's why I went for MS in Computational Analysis and Public Policy that you are talking about. So I have completed it now and I'm coming back to join the Government of India. So my interest lies in the intersection of public policy making and the AI and ML applications that come into and how they interweave into these things. What are some of the pros, cons, and some of the concerns, and how we can address it in policy making and these kind of issues.
You said that you just finished your MSCAPP at the University of Chicago. So what's been the learnings from there? Talk about the course, because I believe this is the first of its kind which looks as Master of Science in Computational Analysis and Public Policy. So what's the learnings from there, and how do you plan to leverage those learning with policy making over here in India?
Yeah, it's an interesting course. I'll not take much time about that, but basically there are very few courses like this which work at the intersection of public policy and the computational sciences. India is at the cusp of transformation. If you look at it, the way different departments or the different governments, state governments, they are going big into the AI applications. We are right now at the cusp where we are there. We have the manpower, we have the potential, and we are looking at with the base that has been already laid by the JAM Trinity, what we call the Jan Dhan Aadhaar and mobile Trinity that is there. With that base, we are going to leapfrog into the next generation. So we exist there and the potential is immense. The question is, how do we leverage that, and how do we actually do it in a way where it is useful to the society without bringing in those associated harms that sometimes come and that sometimes manifest in a bad way that we are seeing in some of these societies. In US, for example, the privacy concern or some of the wrong things that we are seeing that AI has done unintentionally and so on. So without getting into those kind of problems, how do we actually navigate and leverage these technologies? So I look myself as somebody who can make an impact wherever I am, depending on which ministry I get or where I get posted and so on. So I would always be looking for opportunities where I can leverage this knowledge and see how we can, wherever we are standing, how we can take it forward using and leveraging these kind of things.
COVID has kind of nudged us to take a look at these frontier technologies, because all of these technologies are somehow in the span of that very 2.5 years is accelerated, and those use cases have becoming very globally, very there. You can see it visually that, how education completely got upended. We're seeing that how healthcare can get upended with, remote healthcare leveraging AI and XR and so on and so forth. So you mentioned about, obviously that, how with the MSCAPP, they talk about how you can leverage these tools for public, your health, your urban or trade policies. So would you like to talk about, real world use cases, possibly things that you have done here in India, and if you have not done, because it's too early, because I mean it's about collecting all those datas, and passing the data to find something really interesting and building a solution which works for the India, because India 1.3 billion people, I mean it's a very different ball game. But I'm sure you must be waiting to get your hands dirty, and I'm sure you must be looking at specific sectors, which is of your interest, or you feel that those are those low hanging fruit. So where do you think you would like to start from, leveraging AI, ML, and other frontier tech in actually bringing these real world solving these real world problems?
I'm glad, Eddie, you asked that question. Okay, let me just step back as to how these things, work in terms of governance and how it started. So if you look at like the evolution of this whole thing, let us go back to, let us say, late 80s and 90s, when the computerization actually started. So that was like phase one, nothing to do with AI and all. You have rules. Government works with rules. So there are some rules. You codify those rules. So you get a software, then the software does the thing. So you have this online submission of applications or online ticketing systems in railways and so on. They are like, basically you have the software, you have the rules, and you do your things online. The phase two of the development in governance would be the AI. It's just starting, as you said, the data is being collected, cleaned, and so on. It's a mammoth task. So this phase will be very interesting, because here you are not making the rules. The software is learning the rules from the pattern that you are showing it to the software by giving this data. This is the second phase. And this is the scary phase, because what happens here is, unless you really understand how these things work, you might end up doing things inadvertently in governance, which would actually backfire. So if, say, for example, let me give you a concrete example to make it all clear. Let us say I'm interested in making an AI which detects the tax evaders. Now, with that intention in mind, I'll collect a lot of data from the tax department, and then I'll feed it into my training algorithm. And what it does is, basically I've given the labels. These are the people who are tax evaders, and these are the people who are good. So it extracts all those input features, and then finally it gives me an algorithm, says, hey, you know what, give me the features of the new guy, and I'll tell you whether he's a tax evader or not. So that's your like trained AI now. Now, what do? You launch it on the public, and then you start like flagging people and say, hey, these are the people who are the tax evaders. And then ultimately, if you find that there are like some of them who are actually not, typically what you call as false positive in the technical language, but then, let us not go into the jargons, but basically you flag some wrong people as tax evaders. So how do you prevent this? So these are the questions that will come in when you start applying AI in a big way. We are looking at very nebulous kind of applications right now in AI, where we are trying to do very small things. A lot of times we pass the general code-based software as AI, which is not actually AI. So we have to be very clear when we use the term AI and machine learning, because it's very cool to say that, oh, hey, you know what, this is an AI product, but actually it's not an AI product. You have coded the rules there. So it's not that the machine has learned something there. Coming personally to what I have worked on or what I would like to work on, that's like whatever Government of India says, I'll be happy to work on. But in this course, I was working on a very interesting project where I was trying to predict the outcome of a free trade agreement based on two countries' gravity parameters. In international trade, you have something called, researchers use something called a gravity parameters. In very layman kind of terms, what it says is the trade between two countries is dependent on how big their economies are and how far they are. Like two big countries, even if far away, like it's the same. Like you have the gravity mass equation, you have the gravity parameters in international trade. So basically, two huge countries who are far away also will trade well, or a big country and a small country nearby will trade well, but two small countries far away will not trade that well. So the distance is not only the geographical distance, it's also maybe cultural barrier, the language barrier, the currency barrier, the trade openness barrier, and so on. So there's some 70 parameters. So basically, my project was to take all those as input features and see that when a country pair went into a free trade agreement, did this FTA increase the trade, and give all those labels to an algorithm, training algorithm, and then train it and then give me two new pair of country, and then it will predict whether the FTA will work between these two countries or not. I mean, surprisingly, the model initially didn't do well till I reached the random forest, and then I trained it with the decision trees, and they say, okay, go a little deep, little up, and after tweaking all those things, I could make the model work decently, reasonably enough, and yeah, I mean, it is there, it is working. So that opened my eyes, because I thought, okay, here is an interesting thing. I mean, if you have enough input features, you can actually fit a model which will do reasonably well. The question is, in the real world, would someone bet on this model? Let us say the model predicts that the trade deal between let's say two countries which are not on very good terms, and then it'll do very well. Now, given that, would the policymakers go ahead say that, oh, okay, you know what, this AI model is saying that this particular FTA should do well, we should go ahead with the country? No. So, I mean, a lot of geopolitical things, a lot of human decisions will come in. So AI can at best, at the current state of development, AI can at best be an augmenting tool for the decision makers to give input to the policymakers and say, hey, look at this. This is the direction. You can go in this direction, and probably it will bear fruits. But then it's the policymaker or the decision maker who has to take the final call. That is number one. Number two is, whenever you're taking a penal action, let us say the tax example that I gave, if you start flagging wrong people, anytime you initiate a penal action, you have to be very clear. It cannot be based on an AI decision saying that, oh, you know what, this guy is a tax delinquent, so let's shoot a show cause notice to the person. You should not. It has to go through the human inspector or whatever level the person is. The person has to look at the case because AI has flagged it, and then only when the person is convinced, he or she should then issue a show cause notice. So unless we build the scaffolding and the regulations and so on, we cannot actually think of putting AI into governance and say, hey, AI will start running and it'll hit the road running and we can use AI everywhere in governance, because there are a lot of public policy issues that come in. So these scaffoldings are being developed. I mean, if I can digress a little, Eddie. So these scaffoldings are being developed in the sense that if you see UNESCO is working on some kind of like principles of AI, OECD is working on AI principles, and even our government is working on some of those principles and so on. But while they develop, we have to think about what questions should the government ask. I mean, anybody can come up and say, hey, you know what, I got a cool AI product. Why is now your government not using it? Or else, hey, you know what, like, give me this data, I can develop this thing for you. Or anybody can walk up and say, I mean, anybody who knows scikit-learn or some kind of basic toolkit he has, he can walk up and develop these AI products. But then how do we actually use it in the governments? That is something we have to think deeper about. If you want, I'll be happy to talk about it later, or probably in this podcast itself. But yeah, I mean, that's an important question.
Right. Yeah. So I would like you to talk a little bit more about, how we can get about leveraging AI, because like you said, there is so many problems right now, because I guess we have been pushed in a world where there's going to be, it's like almost like a data explosion of sorts, because almost all technologies right now, I think, are extremely data hungry, whatever which is coming, I mean, be it augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality. Through these, I mean, there'll be glasses like these, which will have inside, outside tracking, and they'll be tracking anything and everything that we're looking at, data collection. Autonomous vehicle, which is coming at this point of time, LiDARs and cameras, the kind of data that will be capturing is going to be humongous. The digitization of the world through Internet of Things, the scanning of the physical world, making sensorizing of physical world so that, we can better understand the physical world and, build more products, digitizing the physical world. That's one part. Then we are getting into this crazy world called the metaverse, the Web 2.0, Web 3.0 transition. We are transitioning from a Web 2.0 to Web 3.0 world where we are building these digital worlds, and in this digital world, there's a separate economical layer over there. And then there are these virtual digital assets over there, NFT. So physical things in a physical world, and the data collection, digital world, separate world, which is data collection. So we are going into this crazy world, and for a technologist, the burden is becoming more and more. How do you, because I think every little bit is going to be exciting for a government, because there's nothing, because there is the digital world, that the economical boom over there is insane, plus the physical world with this new data which is we are gathering. Obviously there's going to be, besides the pros, there's going to be lots of cons, so we'll get into that. But yes, maybe talk about this full data overflow which is happening. How do you collect it? How do you clean it? And what could be the possible applications, real world applications of, where you can create social and economical benefits for the government?
Yeah, I think, recently, a few days ago, I had written a post about it, where I talk about how do you leverage the data with the government. So basically what happens is, yes, you are right. I'll not even go step into the digital realm because the possibilities are limitless there. Let me be very honest. When I hear about the Web 3.0, Web 2.0 about the content creation from the user side, Web 3.0 is about economy from the cooperative peers and users. So you are moving into a technology where, you might have your own monetary system, your own fiscal policies, and so on. So you can small multiverses in itself. So it's mind-boggling what these things can do, but I'll step back from that because I'll keep it real to the public policy realm here and what exists in the real world. So I had written an article after a little bit of thought about it, in the sense that with the current system and with the existing data sets that we have with the government, how do we leverage it? So a lot of times what happens is, when I talk about these things, I'm basically talking about the supervised learning kind of approach in AI/ML, because that's the most 95 or 99% of the applications are covered there. There might be a few cases of unsupervised things, but then again, indirectly it again becomes supervised because somewhere you have to say that the cluster that has been identified is something and those kind of things. So I'll stick to the supervised ones. So you need, with the current setup, you need X and Y's in to train anything in the AI or ML. So you have the input features and you have the labels. So in the government, there are two types of problems. One is the data sets might not be available in the way which is amenable to learning. It might not be in a good format. It might not be it can even exist in PDF format where you have to again key in and do all those things. Very humongous task. But some of the areas you might have good data, like international trade data, we generate in a very, very, very good way. So you have those data. But then if you want to use it for these kind of application in the government, you have to see how do you actually leverage it by seeing whether you can attach labels to it, and then whether you can use it to train an algorithm. But before you do that, this is an important step that many people forget. Is there a business case for AI? So once the business case is made, then we come into these data sets, what I'm talking about. So sometimes it's with the same department, in which case it's very easy to do any kind of analysis. Let us say a GST department wants to do some kind of analysis on the supply chain resilience of things that are coming out and coming in and going out. They can do it because they have all the data that is required, the firm level data, as well as the ITCHS tariff level data, whatever you need, the turnover data and so on. But sometimes it might not be easily available. Like, for example, you want to connect, let us say, the crop sowing pattern with let us say, the weather prediction and the farmers' agriculture mandi produce price at that time. So that becomes a little tricky because they might be lying with different departments. The land revenue data might be available with, let us say, the state government. The agriculture mandi maybe with the APMC people, and then you might have the weather thing with the meteorological department. So clubbing all these three and then saying that, okay, fine, this is the weather prediction. So this is the mandi price. The AI will predict that what crop you should sow in those areas, depending on, other features. So this becomes a challenging thing in the government, unless you have a centralized agency which is looking after this kind of AI development. An individual department might find that it is wanting in terms of resources to do this. So this can be, let us say, a tertiary kind of thing where the government steps in a big way and says that this is the central body, we should do this. But inside the department, whatever can be done, there are like humongous. You can think about the application, and you have so many applications. Forest department is doing so many good things about AI. Recently I was reading about, I think probably Gujarat government's forest people. They were doing something where the lions in Gir will be identified using this AI cameras. Camera, we should use the AI technology to detect whether how many lions came in and went out and so on. So these are like interesting kind of applications that are coming out. So the list is endless. But to think how do you leverage data with the government, I think probably that article is a good indication. I'd rather refer you to go to that link, because I have covered all the cases which can come in, wherein X and Y are with different departments, X and Y are with the same department, or X and Y are not amenable, and so on. So yeah.
Right, cool. I mean, I'll definitely link that to the conversation, so I mean, the audience can go through it. Now, I'm sure you follow, your peers in the other nations, like US, and other nations. How are they leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning for trade and commerce? I'm sure if you could share some of those cutting edge of innovations of how they are doing it, it'll be very nice.
Uh, the biggest application that I am seeing coming up in trade is leveraging AI and ML to understand the trends. So basically what's happening is you have these thousands of shipping things going here and there. You have got the vulnerabilities in the supply chain. So algorithms look at big data in a little different way than humans can look at it. So people are trying to leverage AI to understand those vulnerabilities. I mean, that is where I think a big application will come in. Second thing I'm seeing is understanding the economic complexity. If you see, there is a website called oec.world where they're talking about product space and the economic complexity. Basically, the idea is the more complex your economy, the higher the possibility that you will be in among the richer countries. So that way, India's economic complexity is increasing in the sense that we are making products which are more and more complex. They're dependent on a lot of intermediate and the initial input products. So analyzing this economic complexity going forward, I mean, till now it was more like rule-based kind of thing, but going forward, as it becomes more complex and you want to interweave a lot of insights into it, AI will come in very handy in this area. So these are a couple of applications where you can see that AI is emerging. But I'll not say that there is any ready-made product which is available, which you can say, hey, this is an AI product in trade and it's very exciting, we should use it. I mean, trade flow analysis and analysis of relative comparative advantages. These are very rule-based kind of things which are there for last like 15, 20 years. People have been working on them. And we have had this software, we have seen them. But yes, now time has come where we can leverage AI technology in this. But if I step back from trade and commerce and you get into the finance part of it, I mean, the world opens up. I mean, you might be aware like how the digitization of finance is going to change the way we trade with each other. Right now, it's nationally. The way UPI has revolutionized Indian, internal commerce, it can as well change the international commerce. I mean, why should we depend on SWIFT, for example? I mean, in the current era where like SWIFT can be, held or controlled by certain countries. So you can always, there is a scope to look beyond and say that with given technology today, or even for example, Web 3.0, why don't we think something beyond SWIFT and do something? So there, it might again be like initially a rule-based kind of thing, but then for analyzing or identifying trend and patterns, AI can come very handy.
Right. I mean, are there any applications your peers are using which has caught your attention? Because you mentioned, I mean, it's in the finance space, it's being leveraged. The healthcare space is being leveraged. But is there anything that you would like to share with our listeners? How AI and ML is being used for public policy and governance?
Yeah, one very popular kind of AI that you will see. I mean, it's like more like a pedestrian. It has become now your credit history and credit analysis. I mean, that's a very simple kind of AI application. Given a person applies for loan, for example, that's a very low-hanging fruit which you can automate based on the past data. It is being very widely used in many of these US banks and so on, because it's very easy to see you have a credit score which is again derived from, let us say, some of the features that has been fed to it, and then you have the score, and then you know that whether the person is eligible or not. So these algorithms are easy to develop, easy to train, because you have ready-made data, and that can easily be transferred to Indian context also. I'll keep the ethical part of it or the discrimination part of it, those things away for the time being. But this is one application where I can see that there is a low-hanging fruit. Second is the fraud detection kind of thing. Wherever there is an anomaly, for example, there are certain transactions which are easy to know that they're not fraud, but then there can be some kind of some transaction that you do, which can be fraud and which can be immediately flagged in real time by a very well trained AI. For example, it's quite possible that some of the senior citizens who might not be very well versed with mobile technology, they might fall prey to these kind of scams. But whenever that happens, probably if we give sufficient data, a good algorithm can be trained which flags and says this is suspicious. Call the person and check whether this is really the transaction that the person intended to do, or was it like some kind of fake prank call came and the senior citizen is being duped. One of the features in such an algorithm while getting trained can be an age. So the moment it sees a person above 60 years doing a certain transaction which he usually doesn't do in the normal course of things, and then that particular thing is suspicious, so immediately that flags and a call goes to the person reconfirming the transaction. So these are very simple applications, low hanging fruits, which some of them have been developed, and some of them people might be thinking like us sitting together and discussing on the podcast. Someone might come up with the idea and say, hey, this looks good, I'll do it. So if you look at it, I mean, a lot of these the fraud detection when you call the call center with your credit card details. I mean, there are people who have already developed. I think Pindrop has done some good work in this area, and they have very good system which detects this, and there are others also who are in the space. Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned about the moral and ethical implications. We're talking about technology, and that is something we need to obviously talk about, because we're getting into a world where we're collecting so much data, and you mentioned in the beginning of the conversation how some nations is leveraging your data for you're manipulating its or maybe data surveillance and things like that. And besides that, obviously so far. With the data, we were only automating industries, the automations of machines, that was happening. But right now, I think we're slowly shifting from the automation of industries and machines. We getting into the cognitive automation part, because there are also conversations that since data is the new oil, these large companies, do we actually need the CEOs? Because we can, if data is the truth, then can the decisions be made by data? So I mean, address all of these a little bit, because there is one part, obviously the which I think I want to address it to my audience, because I think when we talk about get into these conversations about technology, there's largely people start saying, oh, technology is this tool which is going to get take us to a dystopian society, and technology is bad. But I think that's never the case. Technology, like any other tool, is a tool. How we use it, how we leverage it, it'll end up shaping into that direction. So your thoughts and views on the automation and data being leveraged by nations and organizations, the responsible AI that we all talk about, how do we get over there?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you are very right. I mean, this is very pertinent and very timely topic. In fact, especially in the public policy sphere, because this is something that the government should be wary about, cautious about how do you use AI, how do you leverage the data, what do you do with it. And people talk about responsible AI, people talk about ethics of AI, but let us go very practical. Let us say a team of AI comes up to the department's head of the department, or let us say CEO, and he says, hey, you know what, we have got this cool AI tool which will do this great thing for you. What should the CEO ask? Or what should the public policy maker ask? Or let us say parliamentary committee. What should the parliamentary committee ask? They say, is your tool good? I mean, that's a very dumb question to ask. Okay, what is the accuracy of your tool? That's a reasonably intelligent question. But then the guy says, boss, look at the ROC curve. It looks so stunning. Look at this accuracy score, look at the precision, look at the recall. And then suddenly you are like taken back because you really don't know what is recall. You really don't know what is ROC characteristic. Okay. Then what is the next question that you ask? Hey, you know what? Will this do any harm to the public if you launch it in the public? Then say, no harm at all. This is such an accurate tool. The AI teams, gives you back. So the question really boils down to, can we replace CEOs, or let us say that the top policymakers, and say AI will do that? No, it cannot. AI can be at best an augmenting or supporting tool. A good example can be, probably you might have heard about the ProPublica publication that came up about the Compass tool. Compass was a tool that was used to help judges in US to decide whether a particular person is susceptible to recidivism. That is, if you give him out, if you leave him on bail and he comes out of, and then what is the chance that he might do again a crime or commit a crime? So it was found that, Compass was passing on all other scores, accuracy and those kind of things. But then later it was found that it was discriminating based on the race of the person. So that was very unfortunate kind of thing. The question is, give me some questions which as a policymaker, I can ask the AI team, which will tell whether the application is in the right direction or not. A simple questions which the answers with some kind of template answers in non-jargonized way, which will help me evaluate the AI tool. That is not there as of now. I realize that this can be divided into three buckets for policymakers or the top administrators or the parliamentarians and people who are in the committee and so on. Three broad categories of questions that you can ask the AI team to ensure that the cons, what you're talking about, Eddie, those things do not happen. One is the business case and governance process redesign that is required to get the AI. Then you have to talk about algorithm design. It sounds a little scary that how can a senior person talk about algorithm, but I'll break it down for you. Then, of course, the question of fairness, accountability, networks. So what kind of questions can you ask? So basically, when it comes to the business case, you have to justify the use of AI. How do you justify the use of AI? Can a simple rule-based approach work rather than using AI in this case? You cannot say that AI can do great things, but you have to say specifically in this example, why do you think AI is a good case? Do you think it's a prediction problem or is it a causation problem? And how AI is going to improve the accuracy or improve the public service delivery and so on. Then in the governance, especially, you have to also think about the process design. Most of the processes, they are legacy processes. You cannot just put an AI tool and try to do something there. For example, tax evasion detection is or has been traditionally a manual process, in the sense that people detect that, okay, this looks like a fraud case, and then they send a show cause and so on. But then if you put an AI tool, you have to do some kind of process redesign, in the sense that you have to say, we take legislative or administrative approval to put this AI tool, and then AI can assist the inspector, but it cannot take direct action and do these kind of things. So this is called process design and process redesign. So these are the two things that initially you should ask these two questions. What is the business case? And what are the process redesign or process design things that are required? And what are the administrative and legislative approvals that are required? You have this, then you can move on to the algorithm design question. So when I say algorithm, the policymaker need not ask, okay, tell me, did you use the decision trees, or did you use some gradient boosting methods, or did you use the neural networks and so on? All you have to ask is, what did the AI train on? Like, what data did you give it? The moment the answer comes that this is the data I give, that will give some kind of indication to the policymaker that, okay, the data used sounds reasonable. And what was it fed on? Like, who labeled the data? For example, if I'm training let us say credit delinquency kind of AI algorithm, where you give the person's income and characteristic and so on, and then it will say whether the credit is approved or not for a business. For example, a lot of businesses in India is given by some kind of government assistance. So especially the MSME sector. So in the MSME sector, let us say there is an AI tool that we want to deploy, and we say that if he's paying GST for last 3 years, his credit should be automatically disbursed. So that being the case, the AI tool might also flag certain cases. So who is giving the label for the training? And from where did you pick up the data? Is it discriminatory, in the sense that probably sometimes what happens, the fields might also be discriminatory. Like, for example, if you are developing a credit dispersal kind of thing, you don't have to capture the gender of the person. The moment you capture the gender, you might not be knowing, but you might be putting some kind of bias. It might be so happening that in past 100 cases, women got statistically less number of cases approved than men. In that case, the AI will learn the same trend. It will understand that if women is there, I have to weigh it down so that the approval chances will go down there. So you have to be very cautious. So this probably the policymaker will not be able to catch, but by merely asking this question, the policymaker can egg the AI team to look into these things critically. So that is the idea. How is the data constructed? What is the source? Who has labeled it? Then comes the evaluation matrix. How do you think about evaluating? Don't come and say that, okay, the ROC curve is great or something is great, F1 score and all. You have to talk in a very simple way. Give me in non-jargonized way, what is the evaluation matrix? So I have given an example also. In a test, 100 test cases given to the AI to evaluate the performance, there were 20 examples of tax avoidance and 980 innocent cases. I mean, that a policymaker or a parliamentarian can wrap his head around. Here, if you give data like this, people can understand. But if you say the same data, let us say 20 examples of tax avoider and 980 innocent cases, our AI model flagged 30 cases as tax avoiders. It identified 18 tax avoiders correctly, and the remaining 12 were innocent people flagged as tax avoiders by the tool. Now look at it. If you use the accuracy measure, it comes 98.8% accurate. That is very, misleading, because 98.8% accuracy, anyone will say, hey, go ahead and use the tool. But then if you look at it, it is flagging 12 innocent people out of 1,000 wrongly. So there you go. So these kind of things, when you ask the question and you ask the answers in simple language, that will unravel a lot of this, mystery that is built by the, I'll not blame the ML community. They're mathematicians, computer scientists after all. So they'll talk in their jargon. But then it's the job of the policymaker to step back and say, hey, I don't want that. Give me this. So somewhere people like us come in who are existing at the intersection of these two, trying to develop these kind of frameworks where we say, okay, we'll simplify it. Because here I'm not getting into those OECD AI principles or UNESCO principles. The same principles, I'm trying to boil it down to simple questions and the template answers and how do you do and what principle it is going to serve. Same comes to fairness and bias. How do you do it? Accountability. A lot of times what happens is, I know of an example where the department said that the AI has flagged the person as something delinquent in certain categories. So we will do the investigation after that. The question is, who is accountable? If the AI has flagged wrong, who is the person whose head should roll, or who is at least responsible for doing that thing wrong? So somewhere, if that is there in the chain of command, it becomes very easy that somebody is taking responsibility for the tool that is being rolled out in the governance. And then, of course, you have the data privacy concerns, and then whether the public consultation was there, where people from outside were consulted, especially the people who represent the consumers or, for example, the public, civic society, whether they're involved, and then the risk evaluation, and then the explainability. The last thing is explainability, because this is one thing that is favorite of most of the people who talk about this responsible AI. We all talk about, can you explain that? Honestly, I have worked on the RNN models. For example, I was trying to do some language models. I cannot explain that model. Let me be very honest. I can tell you, forget about multi-layer. Even single layer, if it develops that weight matrix, if you look at it, it can have like millions of those parameters with all those vectors. How do you wrap your head around 300 dimensional thing and then say that, oh, you know what? I think we can explain it like this. You cannot explain a neural network as to how it learns or what trend it picked up and so on. People are working on explainable AI. There is no doubt. That questions a lot about, if you can't explain something, probably it is doing something wrong. We don't know. But we don't have to be so skeptical. Even if you can't explain, as long as your data, the inputs have gone good, your labeling process has been good, you're able to demonstrate that it is not doing anything wrong. That should be sufficiently reasonably good enough for us to go ahead. Everything cannot be explained. If it's a simple regression model, anybody can explain. If it's a complex neural network model, we probably have to justify as to why are we using neural network than try to explain neural network. So that's where I would stop at.
Right, yeah. There's some crazy things happening. Obviously, we with the innovation space, with the GPT-3, the transformer-based models, doing some insane things. Then there are these Dolly 2, then Google's image, and they're doing some insane things. But obviously, we are far away from understanding how it is actually doing it. But you also mentioned, that there are people who are working on explainable AI, but that I still feel it's far off. My last question to you, because we're running out of time. There is this in India. Whenever we talk about China, there is a group of people which becomes completely, like a no-no with China. Though I feel that China is one of the nations which India should emulate, because, in a very short time, they moved from being a copycat nation to global leaders, But somehow I see that, the import, there's been blocks with the neighboring countries for, and I think it also happened with drones. So do you... If we're getting into a world, we're talking about globalism, but then we're taking that little nationalism approach, because, we're trying to save our own entrepreneurs and startups. Do you think by possibly imposing blocks or bans on imports from neighboring countries such as China, are we stifling competition which would lead to, because there are only these Indian innovators, then they don't have competitors. And I personally believe that, when there's competition, the innovation accelerates. And not just innovation, I think the pricing also dynamically changes. Then we get competitive pricing. So would you like to talk about globalism, nationalism, and these bans against China? And how do you think, as a Director General for Foreign Trade and Policy, how should we kind of react to those?
It's a very broad thing, but very pertinent thing that you're asking, Eddie, there. And I'll not be commenting on official capacity, but let me wade into the general debate that is going on. I mean, just like I think a couple of days back, Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary of US, talked about friendshoring. So basically what he meant by friendshoring was we would like to reorient our supply chains in a way so that it passes through friendly countries, whatever it means. So basically like probably anti-China, I don't know. So it was a fallout of Russia-Ukraine war that in that context, he was talking about friendshoring. So yesterday or day before, there was an article by Professor Rajan, Raghuram Rajan, who was talking about don't go with friendshoring kind of nonsense, because I mean, in the free trade world, you're putting inefficiencies whenever, like kind of argument that you were making, that you are putting in inefficiencies and costs, and the innovation will be stifled in case you do this kind of friendshoring business, because wherever the highest efficiency is there, you should go there and get your things done. And also, this kind of friendshoring policy might hurt the developing or the poorer economies, which might be left out, and so on. This was the argument. So it's a very pertinent and very relevant topic, and that is currently being debated. There is no specific thing that one should not trade with China or anything like that. As far as I know, let me push back a little on that China thing. I mean, we have a very healthy relation with China. If you look at the import-export figures to China, I mean, exports are not that great growing, but in terms of import, a lot of things we source as inputs from China. So that front is another matter. But overall, if you look at it, in the last few years, definitely there has been a pushback against globalization, and probably there are reasons for that, because there are losers to globalization who have pushed back, and they are important electorate bases at many places. For example, in US, if the manufacturing jobs have gone down, that part of the electorate doesn't feel happy about it. And that's why probably a populist leader might come in, because they'll vote in for those people who say that we will reshore the job back into the country. Now, at what cost? I mean, does it like stifle your innovation and those kind of things? That's definitely a very, very important question. When it comes to innovation, I personally feel that India is currently in a very, very good spot because of the young manpower that we have. Probably like our universities are also very good, our IIT and this ecosystem that we have developed in India. I mean, definitely there is scope. So basically the innovation will come from a good industry university interface with a good workforce that you have. So in that sense, US is placed very well. In that sense, India is placed very well. And in that sense, I feel that China is also placed very well, because even their university system is good. Their government X for a lot of innovation in this AI and ML, and they have pushed it continuously for last so many years. If they are today where they are, I mean, people who are against a particular country, they might always come up with nefarious argument that they were copycat or they copied our things, they stole our. But the thing is, like, in the end, it's not very easy to create the entire ecosystem by stealing something. So somewhere there is hard work that has gone into that. So probably there are some lessons which we can also imbibe from others who have succeeded in this this particular area. And India is doing quite well. I was looking at the number of papers that are being published and all, and India has come up quite well in recent years. So I think, given this trend, innovation and development in AI, I see India poised to be one of the leading, if not the leading, at least one of the leading powers in the future in next 10, 15, 20 years. And with the push that the government is giving, especially this government is giving, I see that there's no reason why India should be lagging in this. So I don't see any concern on that front.
Completely double you on the point that India is leading, and because of or engineers, and the universities that we have breeding, creating some brilliant minds and brilliant innovations. But I think if we collaborate more, I think technology will accelerate and the benefits will be more equally distributed. I'm going to squeeze out one last question from you, because you are now coming back to India and you're going to be leveraging not just AI, ML, but all frontier technologies to kind of, build public policies. What do you, in the next 10 years, what are you most excited for? And what could be those distant problems you're thinking ahead? Because, I think globally we were caught unaware with COVID, but I'm sure there'll be these problems that, of global climate and so on and so forth. So what are those, for you that you are like really looking forward to, solve, leveraging AI, ML, human ingenuity to, solve these problems for India to create a social and economical benefit? Yeah.
Yeah, in the next 10 years, if you see, I am very gung-ho about India because India has created the right base in terms of the jam trinity. I mean, you need to have this, what you call the software stack for other things to come up. Now, if you have the UPI stack, probably a lot of fintechs will come up. If you look at the fintech development in India, it's like I would rate it much, much better than US. I mean, we have Zelle payment here, Venmo, and these kind of things. But when I look at Google Pay, the way it works in India, to even a small person selling like Lariel or Panipuri, I mean, we are much, much ahead in that race. So the ecosystem has been created. A lot of good things are being done from the government. The other day I was seeing that there is a lot of work that's going on about the collection of the data, the way the government collects the data. So there is a paper out there. If you want to give suggestions, you can give suggestions to MIT. People are coming up with how do we think about the ethics in AI and so on. So the government is working aggressively on that front. So you have the software stack that is available. You have a framework about which the government is thinking. Once these two are ready, I see that a huge ecosystem will get built on this thing. So next 10 years, what you're talking about, I see it as a very, very high potential time that we can develop and really become leading power in this area. The concerns, if you ask me, there are a few concerns in the sense that we have to keep pushing on the education and the skilling of this younger part of our demographics. I mean, that is one big risk that we have sufficient jobs when it comes to the younger demographics. We are able to leverage this entire AI ecosystem to generate more job, more employment opportunity, optimizing our supply chain so that more manufacturing job comes here. Because in the end, if you want more employment to be given, lifting more and more people out of poverty, you need to have those manufacturing jobs. Because I mean, services, definitely, I mean, you get good jobs in services, but to lift the entire mass up, you need that manufacturing job. So probably AI will be leveraged here along with the robotics and along with the AI, your AR, VR things that are coming up. It will, I mean, how does, I mean, somebody asked me, how does AR, VR will help on these kind of things, or how AI will help generating employment? I can tell you a very simple example. The labeling work, the images are there. Somebody has to label and say, hey, this is a flower or this is a bear or something. A lot of labeling work is happening in India. There are, like earlier days, we had the call center. Now we have the labeling centers where people from like semi-urban or rural kind of background, they come and sit, hold it. Their job is to label the images. So it looks like a simple thing, but this kind of work also brings in employment, and that is bringing prosperity to that one semi-urban family. So I look at these AI applications, bringing in all these things, and I'm very gung-ho about India going great in next 10 to 15 years.
Lovely. Tirumala, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast and sharing your insights. We're living in exciting times, and these convergence of technologies, and you rightfully pointed out, if we leverage it, we can become a global superpower. We already are a global superpower, and I think the things that we are doing, the economic, the entrepreneurial movement, the kind of innovations which is happening here in India is super excellent. I mean, so wish you the very best, and to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. Until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you. Really appreciate this.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Talking to you. Thank you.